I've heard Jacques Derrida made many enemies as a philosopher. Is that true? And if so, why?
It sure is. Anybody who said he wanted to overthrow the way Western philosophy understands the world was definitely going to make a lot of enemies. Some of his critics said he was a pseudo-intellectual, and that he was trying to turn philosophy into a game, that he wasn't a real philosopher, things like that. These comments came mainly from traditional philosophers, but we should remember that in the world of literary analysis, Derrida became very influential and very popular.
So we'll explore Derridean ideas in a minute, but first, can you tell us who he was? Give us some background.
He was born a French citizen in Algeria. And at that time, Algeria, this was 1930, at that time Algeria was a colony of France, a North African colony. So he was a member of a minority, a Frenchman from North Africa. But he was also from a Jewish family, which meant that he was also a member of another minority. And because of his Jewish roots, his education was interrupted during the Second World War. But eventually he was able to study philosophy at a famous French university. And when he studied philosophy, his main influences were the German philosophers Hegel, Heidegger, and Husserl. So he seemed to like German philosophers whose name began with the letter H. Then after he graduated, he got a scholarship to Harvard, another H,
Okay.
where he said he spent most of his time in the library reading Ulysses by James Joyce. And then he went on to have a long and productive career, and he died at the age of 74.
Okay, so what is he known for?
The main Derridian idea involves deconstruction. And this started with an attack on structuralism. In the Lacanian video, we talked about how structuralism views language as a set of interlocking systems which create a structure.
Right.
And at the simplest level, it's sort of a binary relation between signs and signifiers.
This is structuralism. Okay.
A sign represents a signifier, which is very simple. It just means that a word represents a thing in the world.
Okay.
But Derrida rejected this whole idea for very technical reasons, too difficult to explain now. But he concluded that signs really only point to other signs, and those signs point to other signs, which point to other signs, which point to other signs, and so on and so on. He called this the endless play of signification.
So, okay, it sounds a little bit like linguistics, but what does this mean for philosophy?
It means that language is not grounded in anything. And if language is not grounded in anything, you can't step outside language and analyze it scientifically. And if you can't step outside language and analyze it scientifically, that means that you cannot be sure of meanings. And if you can't be sure of meanings, that means that you can't search for the truth. And that's a very Derridian idea. We all want the truth, said Derrida, but we just can't get it.
But, you know, what's the impact on the real world?
Well,
you know?
yeah, in the real world. In Derridian thought, the impact would be that there is no inherent truth in anything written, any text. So a report or a document or a legal contract has no inherent meaning. We would be free to supply our own meanings. And can you imagine the consequences of this? For example, would we be able to have a meaningful political debate?
Let's see. In the Derridean world, what happens when I'm reading, you know, a text? Like, I can just provide my own interpretation.
We all create our own meanings.
And that's it.
It works like this. There's an idea called Logocentrism, which is the idea that speech and not writing is the main principle of language. That sounds plausible enough, but for very technical reasons, which I have to confess I don't understand, Derrida rejects this idea. In other words, or to simplify this, in other words, for Derrida, the meaning of a text is not there waiting for us to discover it. We create the meaning of the text in an interactive or two-way process with the text. What this means is there can be my reading of a particular text and your reading of the same text and someone else's reading of the same text, with each of us creating our own meaning. So naturally, traditional philosophers thought this was an absolutely horrible idea, but literary analysts found this idea to be extremely interesting.
I feel like normal people feel like it's not a good idea, but can you tell us more? How does one create their own meaning?
Yeah, but by the process of deconstruction, which I mentioned earlier. Deconstruction is when you read something. When I say you, I mean anybody. When you read something, you deconstruct it. You take it apart, but you don't destroy it. You reassemble it. You put it back together again. This is why it's called deconstruction, not destruction. We each put it back together again in our own way, in our own individual way. Now, I'll give you an example of this. Now, think about this. Have you ever read a book when you were young and then read that same book again when you were older?
Yeah.
The book was not the same the second time you read it.
Yeah.
It changed. Something's different. So Derrida would ask the simple question, what happened? Did the book change? Did you change? Well, something changed, and it changed without the author doing anything at all. What changed was your deconstruction of the text.
Okay, so Derridean thought is just pushing the author out of the way. Like, is that right? The author doesn't matter anymore.
Sure. In Derridian thought, the author is dead.
Okay.
Now that's just a scary, dramatic way of raising the following question. If your deconstruction of a text is powerful enough to change it completely, is the author's role really so important?
I've heard of this before, yeah. Okay, but one thing about all of this bothers me. Derrida...
Only one thing.
Well, I mean... yes, this language, that's the thing. I can only understand you by talking to you. But Derrida is saying, no, language doesn't really have these meanings. But he has to use language to tell us this. So there's like a paradox going on.
If you put this paradox to Derrida, he'd probably just say, sure. He enjoyed contradictions and paradoxes with a kind of attitude that really annoyed some of his academic colleagues who disliked this unorthodox approach. Actually, when I think about it, there are a lot of stories about his unorthodox actions and unorthodox pronouncements and things like that, and unexpected actions. One of the famous examples was he wrote that he went to a famous library in Britain and there was a priceless medieval book in that library. He ripped out a page from that book and apparently that page became the cover of one of Derrida's own books later.
Really?
Yeah, this is what's been reported. Now, think about this. If he really ripped that page out of the book, it was a crime.
Yeah.
But if you confronted him with this, he would probably just say, sure, but so what? It's only a text. But if he didn't rip the page out of the book, then he was deliberately lying to the reader. Deliberately lying to the reader. And if you accuse him of lying, he would just say, well, look, I told you. There's no inherent truth in any text that you read, including mine. Yeah. And then there's another story where he wrote 3 books and he arranged to have them all published, all together, all on the same day. And people asked him, well, in which order should we read these books? He said, it doesn't matter. It really shouldn't matter. And conservative scholars were shocked by this kind of idea too. And then, there's another one, that's right, the photos. He had a long tradition, for a long time, of refusing to have his photo taken or published for many years. And then suddenly, I think it was 1979, he changed his mind and he had lots of photos of himself taken. And when they asked him about this sudden change, he said it was because hiding his image for so long had made the image of his non-image become his image. Okay, no. Maybe he was having some fun before this. I mean, we expect our philosophers to be very serious people, very heavy people, like Wittgenstein. You can't get any heavier than Wittgenstein. But Derrida enjoyed paradoxes and contradictions, and he just liked being categorized.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah. No, me too. I mean, I actually can relate to that as a human. Mm-hmm. So I get that, and actually it seems more fun than some other philosophers. So. So maybe explain, why was he so disliked? Well, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah, I don't really mean to paint a picture of him as a full-time joker or troublemaker. A lot of the unconventional things that he did, the unorthodox actions that he did and the things he said were actually supposed to make a serious point. So he wasn't really playing games. And when he was interviewed and when he gave presentations at conferences, he was usually very polite, very attentive, and very charming with his musical French and his polished English. Even his critics liked him on a personal level, but they just really disliked his unorthodox approach, and he's very difficult to understand writing style. So when scholars read Derridian ideas, it wasn't fun. It wasn't a good time.
So we have to use language, but what should come to mind when we think of Derridean ideas?
I can think of 3 words right away, 3 C words. Complexity, contradiction, and controversy. Mm-hmm. Complexity, contradiction, and controversy. These are the 3 things that come to mind. And it's possible to talk all day about this guy, his effect on, especially on literary analysis, but there's one story which I heard, which I think very neatly encapsulates what it means to be a Derridian scholar. A definition of a typical Derridian scholar is probably a guy, who spends all day teaching that language is unreliable, meaning is individually constructed, and so on. Then he goes home, he orders a pizza, and he's sure that something round and hot and delicious will be delivered to his door in about 30 minutes. Mm. And do you know what Derrida would say if you confronted him with this paradox?
Sure.
Wait, is that your answer or a Derridian answer?
We can never know.